We're joined now by Mike Pompeo, the former US Secretary of State and former director of the CIA under President Trump. But thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Always a pleasure talking to you. Israel and Hamas have now signed off on the first phase of President Trump's peace plan. What was your initial reaction to this news?
Well, it's remarkable. It's historic. It's still 72 hours away. Still things that can jump in the middle of this and cause problems. But the fact that we're going to get 20 hostages out of Gaza, we're going to get the remains of another 24 or so back to their families is a joyous thing. The fact that they've had to release a bunch of folks who committed crimes, hundreds of folks who are being held by the Israelis today who have been convicted through due process, doesn't make this an equal trade. But my first reaction was it is time for these hostages to return to their families. Right now, 2 years and a day and a half from when they were taken on October 7th, 2 years ago. A great and glorious outcome.
Sure, and obviously, and you sort of allude to it there, sticking points remain and a lot could happen. I mean, there's this sticking point of Hamas saying it will only lay down its weapons once a Palestinian state is established. I mean, how do you see negotiators addressing that and getting around that key stumbling block?
Well, this isn't a new problem, right? This is Hamas handing over these hostages, not because they've become citizens of the world, but because they've had enormous pressure applied against them. And because the Israelis and President Trump and the Americans put enormous pressure on Iran with what they did this past summer, taking out a significant piece of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, the near dismantlement of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the pressure on the Houthis, all of that brought us to this moment. It doesn't mean for a moment that the resistance in Hamas won't remain. Right? There is a resistance movement. Their objective is the destruction of the nation of Israel. And so lots of work left to be done in the aftermath of these hostages being returned. Lots of work to be done to disarm Hamas, to create a civil government. And those two elements are most important to the civilians living in Gaza. The most important people who benefit most from the Israelis' ability to withdraw safely and continue to protect their own sovereign territory, and to get Hamas out of governance, get the armed resistance eliminated, are the people who are living in Gaza who have suffered so much over these past months as a direct result of what the terrorists did there.
I think there's a lot of celebration around the world that this bloody chapter in modern history, could be over. And I think a lot of people are getting ahead of themselves, perhaps talking already about a two-state solution. But does it feel like today we are a step closer to a two-state solution than perhaps we were 24 hours ago?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, but it's a small step. And the trail is littered with history. We know this from when Arafat was in charge. Right? We all know the history, that this gets complicated as soon as you get into the details. In the end, you have to change the nature of the leadership. The leadership has to ultimately come to recognize Israel's right to exist. And we saw that with the Abraham Accords. We saw the Emiratis agree to it. We saw the Sudanese. We saw the Bahrainis. Right? Those nations they said, we are no longer going to have as a central principle the destruction of the nation of Israel. And to the extent Lebanon can do that, Syria can do that under their new leadership, to the extent we can find a political solution in Gaza, then you can begin to build out a model that looks like a just and stable and near permanent peace in the region, which would be a fantastic outcome. But there's a lot of work left to do. And you can see from the statements coming out from various parties who assert they represent Hamas, it's not at all clear exactly who Hamas's leadership will be 2 months or 2 years from now. You can see those leaders already beginning to hedge their bets, because they know too that the resistance is the reason for their existence. Their entire enterprise revolves around continuing armed conflict against Israel. So your point is well taken. A lot of work remains to be done to get what we hope is a step towards a sustainable outcome.
In terms of President Trump's approach to this 8 or 9 decades old problem, what we've seen the last couple of weeks is markedly different from what President Trump was talking about earlier in the year when he talked about a Gaza Riviera, which would require 2 million people being sent into exile. What do you make of the evolution of President Trump's approach to this issue? And do you think the Gaza Riviera plan was part of a broader negotiating tactic?
You know, I always watch President Trump's actions closely, right? He has been remarkably consistent on this file in the Middle East since I was his Secretary of State in his first term. We have a great, reliable partner in Israel. We want good things for the Palestinian people that are living both in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. We want good things for them, but we're not going to allow them to stand in the way of a broader peace. And so we, in the first term, the Gulf Arab states were great partners for America. They continue to be. Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed in the Emirates, the leadership, the Crown Prince in Bahrain are all great partners of the United States. And so, you know, in Gaza, President Trump has made clear he was going to allow Israel to do the work necessary to get these hostages home and to give Israel all the capability they needed to go take down Hamas so that it no longer threatened the nation of Israel. Those pillars have been incredibly consistent. And then you can see, as part of this plan, this 20-point plan, you can see a plan towards political governance not connected to Hamas. And second, a theory of the case on how you're going to rebuild Gaza and make it a peaceful, livable place for the civilians that live there. That's been his mission. When he talks about, you know, Gaza on the Trump on the Mediterranean, all the Trump Tower stuff, a lot of that was theatrics the media brought on. President Trump has been remarkably consistent here.
These were, of course, not direct talks that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh. Lots of parties were involved. From the US side, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and, of course, senior officials from Qatar, from Egypt, from Turkey. Do you think there was anything or anyone that stands out as having been a winning ingredient or a winning player to bringing us to the point we're at today?
Oh, goodness. No, I think lots of credit. And President Trump said this, right? It took many nations coming together and many leaders who were very bold. The Egyptian folks did great work in hosting this. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner obviously lent America's authority and power and certainty to the transaction as well, but brought together the Gulf Arab states, the Emiratis, the Saudis. Everyone signed off on this, the Qataris, the Turks. That's a remarkable act of diplomacy. It's a really good outcome. And so I don't know that there's any one individual, but lots of leaders who worked tirelessly to get an outcome that gets us at least a point where those hostages can be returned home.
Do you think we have here in front of us the blueprint for perhaps solving other conflicts, as some geopolitical analysts have suggested?
I think the whole world will be watching what President Trump did in the Middle East. He gave the Iranians space. He told them there was a deadline, and when they didn't comply with the deadline, he took a strike and decimated their nuclear program. I think for Xi Jinping or for Chairman Kim or for the Ayatollah himself in Iran or for even Vladimir Putin in Europe, I think they can see that, you know, the storyline somehow that President Trump is an isolationist president who puts America first and ignores the rest of the world is belied by the actions that President Trump and his administration have taken. I think that was true in his first term. I think it's equally true in this one. He is judicious in how we use American power, but he understands America's best interests are creating peace and stability in these regions. Certainly where we have friends and partners, we're going to do everything America can do to deliver those outcomes. And I do think that others will have observed this, and I hope we'll adopt something that looks like this, recognizing that America remains the most preeminent power in the world, and it's prepared to use its good offices to deliver great outcomes for not only America, putting America first, but for the world.
Clearly, the president has put a huge amount of energy into this old issue between the Palestinians and the Israelis. If he can solve it once and for all and bring about a lasting solution, how do you think he's going to go down in U.S. history?
Oh, how many presidents have we had try to accomplish just that? I can go back a long ways, almost since the nation of Israel's founding. So yeah, to the extent we get something that's the accomplishment of getting these hostages home is good. But if we get something more than that, we get a delivered outcome that looks like a just and lasting peace, I think President Trump and frankly all of the leadership in the region will go down in history as having delivered an amazing outcome for mankind.
And just lastly, Mr. Pompeo, do you think President Trump is deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize?
Oh, I'll leave that to the Nobel Committee. They can sort through it. But if you ask, if we get a just and lasting peace in the Middle East that fundamentally reshapes that region and keeps our young boys, our American young boys' lives from being at risk, and the lives of citizens all across the region, from Kuwait to Oman to the Emirates, if we get that just and lasting peace, it will be an historic achievement, certainly worthy not only of a Nobel Prize, but worthy of accolades from people all across the world. It's not about a particular trophy. It's about delivering the peace, and I pray that it's the case that this is a good first step towards achieving that.
Okay, Mike Pompeo, former U.S. Secretary of State. Thank you very much indeed for speaking.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and a former national security advisor to President Trump. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya English. Really appreciate it. What is your understanding of what's been achieved these last 2 weeks with regards to curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Well, I think the combined effect of the Israeli and U.S. strikes has been to set the program back very considerably. There's a lot of debate in Washington today about the extent of that. But, Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, referred to enormous damage. I'm willing to take that. We'll find out more later. But it's a significant setback. It doesn't eliminate the program. It certainly doesn't eliminate the regime in Tehran. That's the real source of the problem. But I think this is a good start, at least.
A good start, but not obliterated. I'm not hearing you use that kind of language.
No, I don't think the evidence is there for that. As I say, we'll certainly learn more. I think Grossi's words really are a pretty good assessment at this point. The real question is, does the regime try to recreate the program? We already have indications that they've had some sites they've concealed from the International Atomic Energy Agency. No surprise there. And perhaps other activities. So I think we have to keep a very close watch on it, because the threat of Iran's possession of nuclear weapons is not just a problem for Israel. It's a global threat of nuclear proliferation.
You were calling for strikes on Iran a very long time ago. Does all of this feel a bit like a vindication?
Well, unfortunately, if it had been done 20 years ago, it would have been easier and far less risky, and we wouldn't be at the brink of having a nuclear power based in Tehran. I think the world's got a lot of serious crises going on right now. The war in Ukraine, threats from China in the East and South China Sea, and obviously the incredibly difficult situation in the Middle East precipitated by the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th, 2023. So the real trouble here, I think, the source of it is Iran under this regime. I don't think there's a chance for lasting peace and security in the region until that regime is overthrown.
Given that this was a once in a generation sort of level of hostilities, in fact, the greatest hostilities we've ever seen between Iran and Israel and the United States, I mean, and you say this is a good start, does that mean you think Israel and the United States should have gone further?
I think much more could have been done. I think it was a mistake to stop the attacks. It would have been one thing to pause them so that the battle damage assessments, as they call them, could have been refined, and we could have had a better idea, perhaps also how Iran was responding. Were they moving uranium or equipment around? Could we verify additional sites that we had not yet known? But also, I think the strikes were very destabilizing against the regime itself. We'll now wait to see if the people of Iran, who I think are very dissatisfied, we'll see if they try and take matters into their own hands here. You've seen a real decimation of the top Iranian military and Revolutionary Guard leadership. I think the regime is a lot more fragile than it appears from the outside.
Yeah, you've alluded twice already in this conversation to regime change in Iran, and President Trump has sounded rather opposed to that. Why do you think that is?
It's a mystery to me. He was opposed to it in the first term as well. Now, today, there are reports in Washington that we're offering to finance a commercial nuclear power project in Iran, which I think is madness. The regime's on its back, and this is not the time to throw them a lifeline.
Okay, and there's talk now of another Iran nuclear deal being struck. Do you think a deal should be struck with the leadership that's there in Tehran?
The only deal to strike is how to remove the nuclear capacity that they now have. You know, when we dismantled the Libyan nuclear weapons program in 2004, we packed a lot of it up and took it to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where it currently resides. There's still space at Oak Ridge for the Iranian nuclear weapons program. That's worth negotiating. But any possession of these nuclear capabilities by this regime, I think would just risk getting us right back into the dangerous situation we've been in now for so many years.
It's been a very busy few days. We had President Trump ordering the strikes on Iran last weekend. Iran responded 2 days later. Then President Trump brokered a ceasefire. Hasn't it all been rather hasty, in your opinion?
Well, I think it has been, and I think it shows that although Trump did make the difficult decision to strike, that it wasn't part of a larger strategy. And I think that's always dangerous, because if you get into a circumstance and you don't know how it could play out or what your options are and your path to a successful conclusion, you're at risk. I think the Iranian response has been defiant. That could be pre-programmed. They're still probably assessing how badly they've been damaged. But as I say, when they're pressed like this, when they've seen their terrorist proxies around the Middle East decimated, we've seen the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, which hopefully leads to a government that is not a friend of the Iranian government. Things are moving here in a very favorable direction. And if the regime itself is in as much trouble as I think and hope that it is, there's no reason to give it a hand up.
Do you see Iran doing something else after those attacks on the military base here in the Middle East? Do you see that as a likely scenario?
Well, it would be important to watch. Will they try to resurrect the nuclear weapons program? Will they try to again resume substantial assistance to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis? Do they have that capability? I suspect militarily they're in very, very difficult shape, and a lot of the top leadership has been eliminated. This is when regimes start to fragment at the top, with the supreme leader who's in his mid-80s and not well and no clear succession path. I think they're in a very tricky position inside Iran, and that's where the people's pressure against the regime could really make a difference.
How likely do you see regime changes being?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily going to come tomorrow, but the Ayatollah Khamenei is only Iran's second supreme leader since the revolution of 1979. So it's not like they've got a well-ordered constitutional process to pick a successor. And I think that's the moment when you could really see the top officials in the military, the Revolutionary Guard, and even among the Ayatollahs, you could see real fractionation of the leadership, and that's when it could begin to collapse.
Given that this issue of Iranian affairs, the Iranian nuclear program, is an issue so close to you and your career path and things you've been saying over the years, did the Trump administration reach out to you at all with regard to this?
Well, let me put it this way. I spoke to certain people in the administration. I wouldn't want to reveal their names for fear of damaging their careers with the White House. But look, I think there was a very broad consensus, certainly within the Republican Party, that striking the nuclear program was the right thing to do. Again, not just simply because of Israel, but because of the proliferation threat that Iran posed around the world.
Now, you were present, just moving on to the NATO summit last week at The Hague. You were present at the July 2018 NATO summit, at which President Trump lambasted alliance members for not spending enough. He's just got them to commit to 5% of GDP spend on defense. Do you think this NATO summit at The Hague is going to go down as having been a success?
Well, I think making the commitment is a success, although in 2014, when they made the 2% of GDP commitment, that wasn't carried through 10 years later, which was the goal. So we'll see what happens. I think it's a step that's necessary in a very dangerous and challenging world. But making the commitment is easy. Following through on it is the difficult part.
Does that summit and the unanimity we saw in it, this sort of the sense of harmony, does that send out a message, do you think, to the wider world, in particular to hostile powers?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, we still have a hot war in Ukraine because of the Russian aggression. I'm sure that China has watched very carefully what happened in the Middle East this week and watched the NATO summit. And by and large, I think they should be far more cautious in their behavior in light of this week.
Just lastly, a new label for President Trump emerged at that summit during his exchange with the NATO Secretary General, Daddy. What do you think of that?
Well, fortunately, that wasn't an American assertion that came from the Secretary General of NATO. I'm sure that'll go down as a meme in social media history, but that's not really how I think most people in the U.S. view their role in the world. You
don't look at President Trump as being a father figure?
For goodness sakes, no.
Perhaps not for the rest of the NATO alliance members either. You don't think he looks at them as sort of perhaps being, in a childhood sort of setting, in a brawl setting? That seems to be what Mark Rutte was getting at.
Right. Well, maybe he does, but I don't think the rest of us do. I think they're adults too.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us, Ambassador John Bolton. A pleasure talking to you. Well, my guest today is Francesca Albanese, who is the UN's Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. She was the first woman to be appointed to this position in May 2022. Then, 17 months later, we all know what happened on the 7th of October 2023. Well, her role as the UN's Special Rapporteur has just been renewed, extending her mandate until April 2028. Francesca Albanese, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, how do you see your role? What does it entail as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So as a Special Rapporteur of the United Nations, I am appointed by the member states of the UN sitting in the Human Rights Council to monitor, document, and report on human rights violations taking place in the occupied Palestinian territory, so the territory that Israel has occupied for 57 years now. The Gaza Strip is Jerusalem and the West Bank. And I would have to produce 2 reports per year after visiting the occupied Palestinian territory, but I am prevented from doing so by Israel.
Okay, we're going to talk a bit more about that, and we're also going to talk about your latest report in just a moment. But I just want to ask you to cast your mind back to the 7th of October 2023. You were in that position already, as I said in the introduction. What went through your mind as that news broke?
It was a horrible, horrible day because there was enormous violence against the Israelis. It was quite new as a scene, and it was shocking all the more. And so it was a day of very strong feelings, a day of revolt inside, because I didn't know how I would do this, that I would continue to do this job. But it took me a few hours to come back to senses and realize that this event, this violent event, was the product of over 70 years of violence and depredation of Palestine and the Palestinians, and it had to be resolved as soon as possible. This was the opportunity to go and resolve the root causes of all violence in the land between the river and the sea, which is an illegal occupation turned into apartheid, and unfortunately now escalating into a genocide.
Okay, we're going to talk about some of those legal definitions in a moment, like genocide, because I know you have a legal background. But I just want to ask you before that, we were saying in the introduction your mandate has just been renewed. Obviously, in Israel, not everyone is happy about that. We heard Dani Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, saying, quote, "The renewal of Francesca Albanese's mandate is a disgrace and a moral stain on the United Nations. Albanese is a notorious anti-Semite who has repeatedly expressed not only biased views against Israel, but also hateful rhetoric targeting the Jewish people as a whole." I'm sure you saw that. What do you say to that?
No, I didn't. I hadn't seen it. But, I've been receiving these attacks since even before becoming a special rapporteur. First of all, the real disgrace for the United Nations is that there are 60,000 people who have been killed in 20 months, and Gaza has been turned into a meat grinder, and it continues under our eyes. And while member states starts uttering words of condemnation while trading with one hand in weapons and trading with goods and with the other. So this is the real disgrace. Then Francesca Albanese being an anti-Semite, not really. I mean, criticism of the state of Israel is all the more necessary given the crimes that it commits institutionally and structurally against the Palestinians. It's not my fault. It's a fact, and it's a responsibility I have from the United Nations. Then the weaponization of anti-Semitism is vile, because anti-Semitism exists. It's real, as real is Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism. But weaponizing it to justify crimes against a virtually defenseless populations, it's really ludicrous.
You talk about the current reality in Gaza, and we've been reporting extensively on that here on Al Arabiya. We heard an official at the ICRC describing the situation there as worse than hell. Is that roughly how you view the situation there?
Yeah, I think. Look, again, I've not set foot in Gaza in the last years, but I've had my eyes and ears on Gaza for over 600 days, and it's been horrible. I really don't understand how we keep functioning with all what we have seen, which is not just, and I'm not saying just in order to downplay what I'm saying, but I've seen on the one hand the brutality, unleashed against the Palestinians as a people in all its forms. It's been really vicious. But on the other hand, I've also collected evidence on the people who have done it. And the executioners of this genocide are really young people and young Israelis, and who have been turned into political pawns in an ideological war in order to gain what? Land. It's all about the land.
And as you said at the beginning, this is a land that you're not able to visit. And I'm just assuming that in your capacity as a special rapporteur, that must be extremely frustrating for you, isn't it?
Well, what is frustrating is the fact that this is a situation that is not new. This has been ongoing the occupation has been ongoing for 57 years, during which Israel has been allowed to build colonies after colonies, which are a war crime, to forcibly displace the Palestinians, which amounts to a crimes against humanity, in perpetuity, without ever being accountable. This is frustrating. It's also frustrating to see member states condemning but not following suit with words, and we know why, because Israel is so entangled in our economy through the United States, but not only. It's very difficult to disentangle Israel from the purchase of weapons that takes place from India to Europe, and from the financial interests that are connected to this. It has very much to do with profits. This is frustrating. And of course, it's also frustrating to see member states that nowadays the best thing they can come up with is the two-state solution. What an affront to the Palestinians who are dying. What an affront to the Israelis who have died. What an affront to those who really want peace and know that peace cannot happen without full respect of human rights of everyone, and keep on talking about a political process that they don't even believe in, because we know that many European countries are not ready to recognize the state of Palestine. They're just ready to put money on the capacity building of the Palestinian Authority, which means kicking the can in the air in perpetuity. So this is what is really frustrating for me.
Are there any historical parallels that you can draw in your mind to what's happening in Gaza right now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't think that this is, to understand this, what is happening to the Palestinians, one needs to understand what 500 years of colonialism, of European-led colonialism, have done to the world. I mean, millions of people have been genocided from Australia, Canada, the United States. What we call liberal democracies today are all countries birthed from genocides of indigenous people, controlling the land, controlling the resources, displacing the indigenous, replacing them with the settlers. It's so different from what's happening to Palestine. What is shocking is that it's happening in 2025. We have had 70 years plus of international human rights system, and still, and again, the international law is as strong as the will of states to implement it. And it's clear today that, again, commercial interests come before the life of people. But if I have to think of a parallel as well, as a European, I'm very. I was brought up with a lesson learned, what we thought were the lesson learned from the Holocaust that we committed, from the genocide that we committed in our own land, on our own European soil. The Jewish people, together with the Roma and Sinti, and together with the disabled people, were exterminated because they were the other, compared to the idea of the pure race. That was not something that traveled across some crazy people with something like the Nazis. It's something that was tolerated by the society, because the Jewish people were our brothers and sisters, taken away from our cities, kicked out of civil life through regular laws. I mean, in my country, we kicked out the Jewish people of ordinary civil life with the racial laws, preventing them to take part on civil life, to work in universities, in hospitals, etc. This is how genocide starts. It doesn't. We fail to understand that genocide is not about the means, the concentration camps, rather than the machetes. A genocide is the intentional destruction of a people as such. And what we have done to the Jewish people reminds me of what is happening today to the Palestinians, starving them, torturing them, raping them to death, while everyone is watching. Everyone is watching, from Europe to the United States to the Arab region. And is it possible that no one, 191 member states, other than the United States and Israel, 191 member states cannot stop it altogether?
You raised some interesting points, and I wanted to get back to the word genocide, because you've used it on a number of occasions already, just a few short minutes into this interview. I want to ask you, you've got this background as a legal scholar, and I'd like to ask you what legal basis supports this claim that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, just in terms of the label and the terminology. Talk us through that.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, had we had this interview in March or April or May 2024, I would understand your question, because back then I was pretty much a lone voice together with other special rapporteurs talking of genocide. But today there seems to be a growing consensus about that. The Commission of Inquiry on Israel-Palestine of the UN recognized acts of genocide. The Special Committee of the UN on Israeli practices has recognized that Israel is committing genocide. Amnesty International has produced a 300-page report saying that Israel is committing genocide. Forensic Architecture has provided an 800-page report documenting the cartography of a genocide. There are Israeli genocide, Holocaust scholars who are saying that we cannot avoid the reality that Israel is committing genocide. So let me unpack it. What constitutes genocide is explained at Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which refers to the genocide is the intentional destruction of a group as such. And the Palestinians are a group as such who's been recognized at risk of genocide already by the International Court of Justice in January 2024. Israel has been ordered measure to stop its genocidal acts that could be genocidal, like acts of killing, infliction of severe bodily and mental harm, like torture or sadism against the targeted group, or creation of conditions of life calculated to bring about destruction among the group, or the prevention of birth, like destroying the fertility clinic. So this is what constitutes genocide. Israel has received provisional measures ordered by the ICJ in January, in March, in May. There have been resolutions calling for a ceasefire already in June last year. Nothing has stopped. The thing is that how can you miss the genocidal intent when it has been declared, said, there have been called for destruction of Gaza, not uninvolved civilians, there is no one innocent, even the children are involved. There has been an increasing upfront call to kill kids in Gaza. And it's not just that they've said it. They've done it. Israel has the most sophisticated, one of the most sophisticated armies in the world. So every missile it launches, it's for a purpose. And the reason why this attack on Gaza has been totally disproportionate, totally indiscriminate, totally in disregard of the principle of proportionality of military action, has turned Gaza has pulverized Gaza. So Gaza has been destroyed. And one response for genocide, not just for the actions, but for the omissions. So this is not just the responsibility, in my view, of two members of the government who are now wanted, one current, one past, who are wanted by the ICC for crimes against humanity and war crimes, which can well coexist in a genocidal climate, in a genocidal spectrum. Okay. But what have the other members of the government done? Supported it? What have the members of the parliament done? Encouraging the raping of Palestinians in jail, the killing of children. And what has the judiciary done? What is the population, the majority population in Israel doing while a minority protests against it? So again, I don't know what else does Israel need to do to be found guilty of genocide. Okay,
so let me ask you this. Who, in your opinion, bears the greatest responsibility for the humanitarian catastrophe which we can see on our screens in Gaza? Does it rest with one person, or to whom do you attribute full responsibility?
No, I don't think, as I said, it doesn't rest with one person. Genocide is a collective endeavor. It's never an act, it's a process. And indeed, my deepest regret as a special rapporteur is that I had been alerted already in 2023 by some Israeli Holocaust studies scholars that the situation was included precursors of genocide. Had I been as knowledgeable as I am now on genocide, I would have totally sided with them. Instead, I ignored that. But what Israel was doing to the Palestinians, the extrajudicial killings without accountability ever, the forced displacement, the segregation, the mass incarceration, the dehumanization against the Palestinians was one of the extreme. So the responsibility for it rests first and foremost with Israel. With Israel as a state, there is no question about that. And it's just, unfortunately, it takes time for people to come around and realize what they're doing. We have never been good at complying with that with that obligation in the Genocide Convention, that is to prevent genocide. How do you prevent genocide if people deny that? Even when there was the ICJ even when there was an ICJ set of provisional measures saying Israel risks to be committing genocide, or there is a plausible risk of irreparable harm for the Palestinians under the Genocide Convention, no one really halted the transfer of weapons. No one really imposed the sanctions on Israel. So you see, it's an whole system. It looks like a joint criminal enterprise. Of course, there are states who are very responsible, like the United States, and of course, its responsibility should be assessed on a judicial level. But at the same time, other states, what are they doing? There are states who are continuing to provide weapons, and their governments should be investigated for complicity with genocide as soon as possible.
Now, it's reported that you have been targeted because you're outspoken. We can hear that. You've got strong opinions, and you're extremely passionate about this cause. Tell us about those threats and the fact that you've been targeted. Who's targeted you, and what form have the threats taken?
I push I push back on the fact that I have strong opinions and I'm passionate. First, because they're both incorrect. They're both mischaracterization. I don't have strong opinions. I have a strong sense of what is international law. And I take seriously the commitment to serve the Human Rights Council as I've been requested. The sense I don't have a cause. I'm not committed to a cause at all. I mean, I've never engaged on the question of Palestine as an activist. Yes, I've dealt with the question of Palestinian refugees, Palestinian forced displacement, but I didn't know as much as I do know now on Palestine itself, like the occupied Palestinian territory. Even if I've lived there, I've been there serving UNRWA and serving Palestinian refugees. So the thing is that I'm not passionate. I am disgusted. This is what I am, by the failure of the international system for which I, like many, have given really my best years. I've really believed in it and I want it to work. So it's quite different.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Because of being firm, objective, and speaking with integrity, I'm threatened. Yes, but like many.
But tell me about the threats that you face. I wanted to ask you specifically because it's reported that you have been threatened for expressing the opinions you express and for doing the work you do. Just tell us about that.
I think it's pretty obvious, the fact that I'm accused of being an anti-Semite, while on the other hand, having the support, the appreciation, really there is a cocoon of Jewish organizations, Jewish scholars, Jewish people around me. So this has been a real source of strength for me from the very beginning of my mandate. But being accused of as an anti-Semite, as a European, with the past I have, with the sense of consciousness that I have of what we have done, what is our past, it's very heavy. So this has been, or saying that I'm a pro-terror, that I've incited terrorism against Israeli, or saying that I have not condemned the crimes that have been committed against Israelis on October 7. These are pure lies, or that I've taken money. I'm doing what I'm doing as a volunteer. I've even put my teaching and my work aside to deal with this, because genocide is something as enormous as anything I've ever done. So because of this, I do receive threats. There are individual threats that have come my way, in various means. And then there are the threats coming from member states who create a violent environment against me, because they really point at me like an evil person, and this is a situation. This is incitement to violence against me. I've arrived to the United States, and for days there were billboards in Times Square and other places with my face, and I was accused of being an anti-Semite or a pro-terrorist, and again, it's very heavy, but at the same time, what can I do? This is what everyone, from students to faculty members to journalists to activists, this is what everyone daring to criticize Israel and the system that today is covering up for Israel as to endure.
So I take the point, and you face threats and harsh words, and I can imagine that can be frightening as well. And I'm wondering if it puts you off. But there are people, obviously, large numbers of people who support what you're doing. What do Palestinians say when they meet you? What sort of things do they say to you?
Thank you. So it's quite emotional, because I understand. I mean, I feel sorry for them that they need internationals to speak about what they're enduring, because they have a strong voice. They are an incredible, noble people, and strongly intellectually from our point of view, and they have been the victims of our misery. Our human misery. I mean, what the Palestinians are enduring speak to our failure, not to theirs. Speak to our lack of humanity, not to theirs. You know. No, absolutely. There is a total outpour of love wherever I go. So this is why I'm saying yes, the threats are there, and I don't want to talk too much about that because I don't want to give even more ideas to people to become vile toward me and let's say my private life. Yeah, there is so much love, so much love. Where I live in Tunisia, where I travel to other Arab countries, or in Europe, wherever I go, there are people really crying when they see me, which is pretty astonishing. But this is the reality. It is a break. It's a time that has broken many souls.
Yeah, I wonder how history is going to look back on this chapter. But just to wrap up our conversation, what's your message to world leaders right now?
Why are you doing that? It's not yours. The planet is not yours. The world is not yours. Really, try to think that you're not going to be here for a long time. This is what I would say to the world leaders, knowing that they wouldn't care much. What I feel like doing is sending a message to those who are not traditional leaders, like those who do not control armaments, do not control huge capitals, who do not control algorithms, and have only to lose if they stay in this watching passive mode in the time of a genocide. Yes, as you say, how will history look at us? The point is not how history will look at us. How can we look at ourselves in the mirror when another people is really losing everything? It's time to sacrifice a little bit of our time, a little bit of our comfort in order for these people not to be completely annihilated. But also, if we think that what's happening to the Palestinians is going to be limited to the Palestinians, we're really naive. Our societies will be next.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So, what's next for diplomacy? What might Iran's next moves be? And just how much damage has been inflicted on Iran's nuclear program? Well, we're joined now by General David Petraeus, who is the former director of the CIA, a position he held during a pivotal period. During his 37-year-long military career, he led key missions, including the Iraq surge, US Central Command, and coalition forces in Afghanistan. He's also the co-author of the best-selling book, Conflict, The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Gaza. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for joining us, General Petraeus.
Good to be with you, Tom.
You have described the damage inflicted by the United States and Israel on Iran's nuclear program as being very, very substantial. Would you go as far as to say it's been obliterated?
Well, I think there are some unknowns still that would lead me to stick with what I originally assessed as very, very substantial. That's a lot, obviously. We don't know, though, how much was done inside the mountain of Fordo. I think, again, very significant, but that'll require some time to determine. And we're not sure also whether there might be some of the highly enriched uranium, the 60% enriched uranium that may have been stored elsewhere outside of Natanz, Fordo, and possibly Esfahan, as well as some centrifuges that could enrich it further, of course, to weapons grade being over 90%. So I think that's the reason for hedging a bit on this. The bomb damage assessment process takes time. It takes all sources of intelligence, everything that you can bring together and synthesize, integrate, to reach a conclusion about how significant the damage actually has been and whether there still is some enrichment capacity and some highly enriched uranium to enrich.
Okay, so we still don't have all the evidence. We haven't got the full damage reports. Doesn't sound to me like you think we've seen the last of Iran's nuclear ambitions. What are your thoughts?
I think that's probably correct. In fact, what I would love to see now, the best case of all would be that Iran would agree to a nuclear accord that would essentially ban any enrichment of uranium in Iran. It would also allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to verify that, to oversee the process of the dismantling of all of their nuclear enrichment architecture and allow them to go anywhere they want at any time in the process of so doing. I'm not sure that Iran will do that. I would suspect that that's probably not the case. But then I think Iran needs to do a little bit of reflection and recognize that it is in an exceedingly weak position, given that all of its air and ballistic missile defenses those have been obliterated, I think it's fair to say, given that not a single Israeli aircraft nor American aircraft was even hit, much less shot down during the 12 days of this campaign.
Do you think there's an element of risk here that perhaps these events might have accelerated Iran towards trying to create a nuclear deterrent? I mean, they could argue they need one more than ever, given what's happened in Iran in the last 2 weeks.
One can make that argument. Sure, there's risk in everything, but there's also enormous risk to them if they were to be revealed as doing that. And once again, you'd see another devastating air campaign unleashed on them. And keep in mind that when you put together Mossad, CIA, NSA, other intelligence organizations, there are quite good, as they say, insights into what's going on in Iran. After all, look at what Israel did to reportedly 14 nuclear scientists, all pinpointed and identified and taken out. The same with a number of the leaders of the military and then the Revolutionary Guards Corps and so forth. So that should give them considerable pause, I think, and probably they should conclude that it would be a very bad idea were they to try to enrich to weapons-grade uranium.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that, I mean, I'd like to ask you, I mean, clearly very close coordination between Israel and the United States on intel, on military matters. How would you describe the overall mission and this joint force when it comes to collective intelligence?
Well, the intelligence and military relationships have always been very strong between the U.S. and Israel, and they were made even stronger when Israel was included as part of the U.S. Central Command as opposed to the European Command, which was really sort of a hangover from the past. In a sense, I guess that they thought that the individual who's commanding Central Command should be focused, if you will, on the Arabs and others in the Middle East, and that European Command could look after the Israelis. That was changed a number of years ago. That relationship has improved ever since dramatically, literally operating hand in glove when it comes to this kind of endeavor. And that's been very, very good, as it turns out, in operational terms, as we have seen with this very, very impressive 12-day campaign by Israel and also the very impressive strikes by the United States.
And there was talk of a rift between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump in the weeks preceding the first Israel strikes. Do you think that rift was somehow manufactured to add a little bit more sort of a surprise element?
Not necessarily. There have been rifts between presidents of the U.S. and prime ministers of Israel as long as I can remember. There were rifts when I was the commander of Central Command, and we still had a relationship at that time, although they were not formally part of our area of responsibility. There was a rift when I was the director of the CIA, and it didn't affect the relationship with Mossad at all, nor did the rift previous to that affect the military relationship. Those have always been very, very strong, and they have clearly stayed very strong. One other point I might make about Iran sprinting to a bomb if they have some HEU left and some centrifuges that can enrich it. I don't believe that they have the capability anymore to metallize it. Esfahan, that facility which was hit, was one of the three sites the U.S. hit. In this case, it was hit with cruise missiles launched from a submarine after Israel had already hit it very hard. That's the site where some critical parts of the enrichment process take place. They turn the uranium into something that can be actually enriched in the beginning, and then at the end of the process, if it's at weapons grade, they turn it into the kind of metal that can actually be shaped into a nuclear device. I don't think that they have that capability anymore as a result of the strikes on Esfahan, but again, that's another of the unknowns that is out there.
Sure. I mean, events move very quickly during the course of the last couple of weeks. I mean, within hours of an Iranian attack on a US military base here in the Middle East, President Trump was brokering a ceasefire with Iran. I mean, were you surprised by the pace of events? And did you think perhaps things were perhaps a little on the hasty side as far as President Trump's handling of all this?
I was a bit, to be candid, although there are, as always, elements of the decision-making process and factors that led to that aren't always clearly apparent to all the rest of us. One of those undoubtedly had to do with the opportunity for Israel to refurbish, to replenish its interceptor stocks for intercepting the Iranian missiles. Iran's missiles are dramatically reduced as a result of both their use and then a number of those that have been struck in warehouses and on launch pads, as have been their numbers of launchers. Nonetheless, that gets a bit concerning over time. You know, how many missiles and launchers does Iran have relative to how many interceptors does Israel have? And I'm sure that Israel is making the very most of this opportunity to manufacture more and more and more of those interceptors to be sure, absolutely certain, that they never run out before Iran does.
Do you ever offer any advice to the Trump administration? I mean, have you ever been asked for it? And is it at all common for a former CIA director to be asked for advice by an administration?
Well, yeah, in fact, the director of the CIA called me in a month or two ago, supposed to be 30 minutes, and I left after an hour and 20 minutes. So sure, those who served in positions before you did often will reach out. That's customary, and it takes place. Depends obviously on the relationship between the incumbent and the alumnus of that position.
Okay, that's interesting to know. I mean, just sort of before we move on from the 12-day war, as it's been dubbed, some people, and we spoke to John Bolton yesterday, former US National Security Advisor, seem to suggest perhaps they could have gone further. The Israelis and the Americans could have gone further and perhaps, quote, finished the job. Do you tend to agree with John Bolton?
I was just with him yesterday, as a matter of fact. In fact, we were on stage together at Aspen Ideas. I have generally been a bit more cautious about that than he has, the possibilities for that. Certainly, there are elements within Iran that might want to break off. That's something different than regime change, but that's something we should keep an eye on. There are obviously Kurds, there are Turkmen, there are Azeris, there are Arabs, there are Baluchis, and at least 4 of those 5 are contiguous to countries or regions, in the case of Kurdish regional government, that with which they might feel more affinity than the government in Tehran. When it comes to overall regime change, however, I think that's pretty tough to envision other than from within the regime. Typically, when these situations occur, when a regime is weakened to the point that it might be overthrown, the individual or group that's on top at the end of it when the dust settles is the one that has the most effective and charismatic leader and the most guys with the most guns. And in this case, there's no real opposition leader who has emerged. If he had, he'd be in prison or dead. Although we should note that Israel did bomb the entrance of the prison that holds most of the political prisoners of Iran. But again, there's not that figure out there. There's not the kind of robust organization, weapons, and so forth that could materialize. So I'm a bit cautious about the prospects for outside overthrow of this regime. But you could always envision someone inside the regime at a reasonably high position who could say, you know, this 86 or 87-year-old guy is about to die anyway. Why don't we influence the succession process a bit here, or something along those lines. But I think we should be cautious about hopes that this might usher in an opportunity for a Jeffersonian Democrat to ride in on a white horse and take over and recognize that all of this support for proxies and nuclear enrichment and so forth has been incredibly damaging to their country.
Sure, and President Trump himself seemed hesitant and possibly anti-regime change, a bit like what you're saying. I mean, do you think, though, at the end of the 12-day war, Iran poses less of a threat to the region and to US interests than it did before the war started?
Oh, absolutely, sure. And you have to remember that over the course since 7 October, you've seen Hezbollah dramatically degraded. Its leadership not just decapitated at the very top, but decimated. Thousands of leaders had those pagers that blew up in their faces when they tried to decrypt that message that caused the explosion. And the next day, of course, their only remaining means of communication, the walkie-talkies, blew up as well. It is much, much reduced from what it was before. And because of the overthrow of the Bashar al-Assad regime, the murderous Iran ally, because he has gone to Moscow, presumably, now you have leadership in Syria, still very much an incomplete task to consolidate the control. But Syria is not an Iranian ally at this point in time and will not allow Iran, as Iran used to be able to do, to transit Syrian soil with weapons, ammunition, missiles, rockets, and the implements for making more in manufacturing facilities and bases that Iran controlled in Syria. So that's a very significant change also.
Sure.
Beyond that, Hamas obviously is dramatically degraded. That is by no means over. There's still a lot of work to do, and the three objectives that Prime Minister Netanyahu set out to achieve still have not been achieved, nor has a fourth one that I believe should be achieved, and that is to provide a better life for the Palestinian people in Gaza without Hamas in their lives. And the strategy they're employing will not achieve the first three, much less the final fourth one. And then the Shia militia in Iraq seem to be taking a knee to a degree, perhaps trying to avoid some kind of upset in the months leading up to the election there. And the Houthis seem to be a bit degraded as well. And I doubt that Iran has much to share with any of them at this point, having been so substantially degraded itself. And keep in mind, again, that Iran's air and ballistic missile defense, for all intents and purposes, has been obliterated. And that means that Israel, if it needs to, can fly at will once again above Iran, as long as it stays out of the range of the heavy machine gun air defense weapons, and inflict further damage on Iran as is necessary.
And just mentioning Syria there, as you did, I just wonder what you thought of reports that Israel could normalize ties with Syria and Lebanon. I mean, is that something you would expect to see perhaps during the months ahead?
It would be a wonderful development, I think. Lebanon clearly is still a relatively new government. The degradation of Hezbollah and reduction of its influence allowed the selection of a president after a year of wrangling, allowed the parliament to move forward, allowed the Lebanese armed forces to move into that area between the northern border of Israel and the Litani River, the area from which Hezbollah was raining down rockets on Israeli citizens, some 70 or 80,000 of whom were not able to stay in their homes for well over a year. But let's see how the political situation develops there. Likewise in Syria, I've been impressed that the leader who overthrew Bashar al-Assad, who I should acknowledge was in our detention facility in Iraq during the surge, then to be sure was with ISIS, then broke off from them, Al-Qaeda, and then broke off from them. He is saying the right things, and I think we should give him every opportunity to actually implement what it is that he has been saying, which in essence is to say that this should be a government that represents all the peoples of Syria, a country through which, as you know, many of the ethnic and sectarian and tribal fault lines of the Middle East run, and that there should indeed be majority rule, but also minority rights very clearly guarded. And I'd love to see that come about in Syria after many decades of the Assads running it as their own little fiefdom in a very, very brutal and murderous fashion.
One of the things that emerged in the run-up to the US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites was a lot of debate about whether or not the United States should get involved in what was perceived as being potentially another forever war in a faraway land. I mean, this aversion in the United States amongst the public and amongst people in President Trump's own party seems to be a legacy, doesn't it, of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Sure it does. Yeah. Yeah. No, those are long wars. They were tough. We, by the way, didn't need to leave Afghanistan when we did. That was very sustainable. That was a big mistake. And I said so publicly at the time that we would come to regret it. And I hope that we have. We've plunged the country back into the kind of 7th or 8th century interpretation of ultra-conservative Islam, to the regret, I am sure, of at least 50% of the population, if not much more than that. But be that as it may, those are tough, long, hard wars. We did have Iraq in a very good position when our final combat forces left in late 2011. And tragically, the government of Iraq then pursued highly sectarian actions that undid a good bit of what it is that we all had fought together and sacrificed together to achieve. Regardless, those were tough. And I think you have lessons of the most visceral experiences that one has seen during one's lifetime. And this is a case where that is true. In fact, I wrote my PhD dissertation at Princeton on the American military and the lessons of Vietnam, another very tough war, which actually overshadowed some of what we did early on in Iraq, to its detriment, I would add as well.
Yeah, but do you think the fact that the US public is a bit war weary and they're fed up with these forever wars is the right driver to shape US foreign policy? Isn't it the wrong way round?
Well, it depends on what it is you're contemplating. I mean, Syria is not a long war for the United States. We have no boots on the ground. There's no intent to overthrow the regime, as was the explicit case in both Afghanistan, because the Taliban refused to turn over al-Qaeda. They were sheltering, and because, of course, the murderous regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. This is a totally different war. People should recognize that. I think President Trump has gone to some lengths to explain that, because there is a part of each party in the United States that is, again, absolutely averse to anything that would look like in Iraq or in Afghanistan again. But this is all part of understanding the domestic sources, the domestic factors that play into the determination of foreign policy, not just in the United States, but in any country.
And do you think President Trump should try to engage with Iran? Do you think the Trump administration will engage with Iran? I mean, there's talk about perhaps an Iranian delegation visiting the White House. Do you see that as likely?
Well, I think there should be some preliminaries before that happens, to be sure. But no, I think there should be engagement with Iran. It would be wonderful. Again, if the Iranian leadership could recognize how ruinous their policies have been for the people of Iran, 80% of whom presumably oppose what the regime has done and how it has gone about it. This is a country with extraordinary potential that has repeatedly failed to live up to that potential because they're too busy trying to cause mischief and problems and mayhem in other parts of the region. We should recognize, by the way, as well, that Israel is truly changed because of 10/7 in its strategic outlook. It will never again allow a threat to materialize, not just in neighboring countries, but also in the region if it has the capabilities that Iran has demonstrated. So I think absolutely they should sit down. They should absolutely give up their nuclear effort. If they want to do civilian nuclear power, we or others can provide the uranium to fuel that. But otherwise, they should have no nuclear enrichment, and the IAEA should have full rights to go anywhere at any time to verify that that establishment has been completely dismantled.
Aren't you concerned, though, that Israel has slightly overreached when you consider all of the campaigns that Israel's been involved in across the region, Yemen, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, the Palestinian territories? I mean, does that sound to you like overreach?
It sounds to me like the response of a country that has experienced the most horrible day in its entire history, the worst day for Jews since the Holocaust, the worst intelligence mistake in their entire history, and there were others, of course, the Yom Kippur War among them, the worst military readiness failure, the response was wholly inadequate, and the worst political miscalculation. And that's why I mentioned they have changed their strategic outlook, and I think that that is appropriate. Think about what took place on that day, what they experienced, the losses. Keep in mind that we lost not quite 3,000 on 9/11, the equivalent losses for us of what they sustained for their population would be over 40,000 killed and 7,000 taken hostage. So no, I don't think that that is necessarily overreach. Iran has long been at the root of all of these problems as well, with its murderous proxies. I should note that hundreds and hundreds of American soldiers were killed in Iraq by the explosively formed penetrators that the Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards Corps provided to Iraqi Shia militia who were funded, trained, and guided by those in Tehran.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, just to wrap up this conversation, overall, how would you rate the Trump administration on foreign policy? Does the world feel like a safer place with President Trump in the White House?
Well, I think it's still very much a work in progress. We saw an astonishing gathering of NATO leaders, for example, just last week. I don't think anyone ever could have imagined that a U.S. president could get NATO leaders to do what they did, which was to commit to not just 2% of GDP on defense, but to 3.5%. Yes, it's over a period of time, to be sure, but that is very, very encouraging. And for me in particular, having been a NATO guy, if you will, having a NATO hat position as a 1-star, 3-star, 4-star, while also having a U.S. hat, and having watched repeatedly presidents of either party in the U.S. rail at the insufficient spending on defense by Europeans, and all of a sudden you see them make that commitment. And it'll be 5% if you add in other ancillary actions and tasks that help support the movement of combat power to the Eastern Front, if you will, in Europe and so on. So I think that's very, very significant. The tariffs very much still out there waiting to be resolved. The sooner, of course, that they can be resolved, the better. The smaller that they are in general, also very much the better. That's still quite disruptive, and it creates enormous uncertainty among consumers in the United States as well as countries overseas that are dependent on trade with the United States. In the Middle East, I think, again, still very much a work in progress, but a very encouraging set of results from that particular work.
Okay, well, we've covered a number of topics. We could have covered a number more, but thank you very much in the meantime to General David Petraeus, former director of the CIA. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya English.
Thank you, Tom.